It was gone. Where my dock had stood for 3 generations, only broken posts jutted out from the lake like bones in shallow water. The sun glinted off the waves, mocking me. My boots sank into the soft mud as I walked to the edge, trying to process it. Not vandalized, not damaged, again, like it had never existed. And no one had said a word. Across the water, the HOA president, Lynn Holloway, stood with her usual clutch of board members. Lawn chairs, sunglasses, champagne flutes. She raised her glass and smiled like she hadn't just erased my family's history with a committee vote behind closed doors. I didn't wave back. I walked home. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor. Asterisk, they used the HOA dues to contract a private company last night. Haul it off by barge at 3 a.m. No permits filed. Nothing public. Asterisk, then he added, I thought you knew. No, I didn't know. But now I did. The doorbell rang that afternoon. A thick manila envelope slid under my front door before I could answer. I opened it and found a cease and desist letter from the HOA, addressed to me. Inside, claims of unauthorized private structure on shared shoreline and interference with HOA visual standards. The final paragraph warned me against attempting reconstruction without board approval. I stared at the words. My fists trembled. That dock was built by my grandfather. He wasn't just a builder, he was a war hero. And that dock was his retreat, the only place he found peace after the war. I dug through the closet, heart pounding. Dust rose as I pulled out a storage box labeled Grandpa. Inside, old photos, weathered blueprints, a folded American flag. And at the bottom, an envelope sealed with wax. I peeled it open. A letter, handwritten. I built this dock with my own hands after Korea. I've filed shoreline property exemptions through the county. It belongs to this family. Forever. He signed it with a date. 1963. I looked up, jaw clenched. They didn't just tear down wood. They buried a legacy. And that's when something shifted. Not in my mind. In my gut. If you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, the fury, the loss, the need to fight back, then pause for just 1 second. Hit that like button. Drop a comment below. They messed with the wrong legacy, and subscribe because you need to see what's about to happen next. This isn't a story. It's a reckoning. I scanned the letter again. Property exemptions. There was a signature from a county land officer. I Googled the name. Still active. Still in the state database. I called the office. A woman answered. Her tone changed when I read her the letter. That document's authentic, she said. It's grandfathered status. If that dock was removed, someone broke the law. She gave me a number. You didn't hear it from me. But call this man. He handles shoreline disputes. An hour later, I met him in a diner off the highway. Clean-shaven, sharp suit, state badge clipped to his jacket. He didn't order food, just water. And he brought a folder thicker than the HOA's rulebook. He spread out maps on the table. This beach, this lake, it's under state protection. Those can't just act like kings out here. And this dock, he tapped my grandfather's blueprint. It's registered with us. They committed a violation. And if you want to go nuclear, we can. Nuclear. That word echoed in my head as I stared across the lake that night. The beach looked different now, not serene, but stolen. And I knew one thing. They didn't just take wooden nails. They picked a fight with a man holding a map, a law, and his grandfather's ghost behind him. Next morning, I stood on the edge of the lake again. But this time, I wasn't alone. An SUV rolled up. Doors opened. State officials stepped out with clipboards, cameras, and boots that didn't sink in mud. Across the shore, HOA President Lynn Holloway stood frozen. And for the first time, she wasn't smiling. Lynn didn't blink when the official stepped out. She adjusted her sunglasses, whispered something to a board member, and walked back toward her white patio set like nothing was happening. But I saw it, the hesitation in her steps, the way she didn't look directly at the men with clipboards. The state agents examined the shoreline for over an hour. They measured where the dock post had been, compared the GPS coordinates to grandfather's original blueprints, and photographed the broken stumps. I stayed silent, standing off to the side, letting them work. I didn't need to speak yet. The truth was doing the talking for me. By noon, the lead investigator, Riley, turned to me and said something I'll never forget. This wasn't just illegal, it was personal. They wanted to erase someone. He looked across the lake, where Lynn was now on a phone call, pacing nervously. We've seen this before, he said. I was getting too bold, thinking the bylaws they write override the law we enforce. I asked what came next. Riley's eyes narrowed. Do you want to file for a full shoreline reassessment? It'll open an investigation, freeze HOA authority over this area, and let you submit a repurposing request. I didn't even hesitate. Yes, file it. He nodded and handed me a packet. You'll need to sign here, here, and here. Once we submit this, they can't touch the shoreline again. But just know you're lighting a match, and they're going to feel the heat. Good. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the documents in front of me. Legalese, clauses, codes. My grandfather's name was written in legacy ink across it all. It wasn't just a fight for a dock anymore. It was a battle over who gets to decide what legacy means. I signed the last page, and that's when the retaliation started. The next morning, I woke up to a citation taped to my door. Improper landscaping. The grass was too long, they claimed. 20 feet from the lake, where no one landscaped anything. By noon, an HOA patrol officer came by to inspect my backyard fencing. He wasn't even subtle. He had a phone out, filming every step like he was building a case. Then I saw her, Lynn, on the path behind the fence, watching. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were lit with something bitter, something threatened. She knew. That night, I started laying out my counterstrike. Maps, laws, witnesses. I wasn't just filing paperwork. I was taking the entire beach. And if you've made it this far with me, feeling every turn of this fight, don't sit back. Tap like, drop a comment, take back the beach, and subscribe now. The next part will leave you breathless. 2 days later, I drove into town and stood in front of the courthouse clerk. Submitted the petition. Waited. On the third day, it was approved. Effective immediately, I had permission to apply for temporary repurposing of the shoreline into a public access campsite while the case was under review. That's right. Their private HOA beach. It was now subject to state recreational access. I drove home with a permit in my glove box and an idea in my head. If they wanted silence, I'd bring the music. If they wanted control, I'd invite chaos. And if they stole from my family, I'd make them answer to the public. The next morning, a single pickup truck rolled onto the beach with a tent in the bed. By noon, there were 4 more. Families, fishermen, college students with guitars and speakers. By evening, the campfire was burning where Lynn's husband used to host wine tastings. The HOA lost their minds. They ran up to the campers, shouting about trespassing, flashing their flimsy bylaws like badges. But none of them mattered now, because I had something stronger. The state seal. I walked onto the beach, unrolled the permit, and pinned it to the old HOA sign. This land is under state review. Public access granted under Recreational Equity Act, Section 6B. The sign hung there like a flag on a battlefield. And behind me, someone started clapping. Others joined. Lynn stood at the top of the bluff, silent. Her champagne glass shattered in her hand. She didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a protest. It was the beginning of a takeover. By sunrise, the beach looked nothing like the exclusive retreat the HOA once controlled. Colorful tents lined the edge of the water. Campfires smoldered. Kids chased each other barefoot down the sand where HOA signs used to scream, private property. The silence of HOA control had been replaced by the sound of freedom. But with freedom came fury. Lynn called an emergency board meeting in the clubhouse that morning. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I didn't need to be, because someone inside was leaking everything. I got the first message at 9 a.m., a photo of the whiteboard. Written in red, reclaim authority, push police involvement, smear campaign. They weren't going to challenge the permit legally. They were going to wage war in public. By noon, I saw the first move. A local news station showed up, cameras pointed at the beach. The anchor reported unauthorized gatherings, sudden increase in noise complaints, and residents fearing for their safety. Classic fear tactics. But when the camera turned to interview a camper, it backfired. We were invited by the landholder, the woman said, pointing at me. He showed us the paperwork. Honestly, it's the most peace I've felt in months. They don't own nature. The clip went viral. Comments flooded in. HOA trying to gatekeep the world. This is what community looks like. Protect that dock legacy. But the HOA wasn't finished. That night, a black SUV rolled onto the beach. Out stepped a private security team. Not police. Not city authorized. Just hired intimidation. They walked through the camps, shining flashlights, demanding IDs. One of the guards got in a young man's face. Said they were violating HOA rules. The kid stood tall. You don't make the rules here anymore. Then he pulled out his phone and live-streamed the confrontation. Within minutes, thousands are watching. And when I stepped into the frame, holding the signed state permit under the security guard's flashlight, the stream exploded. This is state-recognized recreational access, I said calmly. You are trespassing under private security enforcement without jurisdiction. I suggest you leave before I call someone with real authority. And just like that, they left. But Lynn wasn't done. The next morning, she posted an open letter online. A carefully crafted blend of outrage and victimhood. She claimed I had manipulated the system. That I'd weaponized state law against hardworking families. That my mob of strangers was ruining their neighborhood. But then came the twist she didn't see coming. A journalist, local, but smart, dug deeper into Lynn's tenure. He found emails, internal HOA records, budget discrepancies, tens of thousands spent on shoreline preservation that never made it into any public report, and one line hidden deep in a PDF, unauthorized removal of structures to maintain exclusive board view. That was it. Proof. They tore down my dock to protect their lake view, and they used everyone's money to do it. I posted the findings publicly, tagged every resident, uploaded the original letter from my grandfather beside the budget file. And the flood hit. Neighbors started asking questions. Former board members came forward. Whispers turned into voices. Voices turned into demands. They wanted an open forum. They wanted answers. They wanted Lynn out. If you've been following this fight and feel the burn of every lie they've thrown, don't hold back. Like this video. Comment "No one owns the water" and subscribe now. Because the next step, we go beyond revenge. We build something that lasts. The city council, under pressure from both media and residents, called hearing. Lynn tried to delay it, filed motions, claimed harassment, but the council denied them all. Dates set. Public hearing. City Hall. Full review of HOA practices and shoreline jurisdiction. When I walked into that room, I wasn't alone. Campers, locals, reporters, former board members, even veterans who served with my grandfather came with medals pinned to their chests. And Lynn? She sat in the front row, pale, surrounded by silence. The gavel dropped. The room fell quiet. And I was called to the microphone. This was no longer about a dock. It was about truth. And what comes next would echo far beyond the lake. The chamber was packed. Standing room only. Cameras lined the walls. City officials sat behind the bench, and a quiet tension clung to the air like fog. I stepped forward to the microphone, the original blueprints of my grandfather's dock in my hand, and met the eyes of the people who tried to erase him. I didn't start with anger. I started with a story about a man who returned from war, broken in ways no one could see, and found healing in a stretch of water behind his home. A dock not just of wood, but of memory, of peace, of survival. And then I held up the photo of what was left, broken posts in the mud, torn out like trash. I read the line from the HOA's internal memo, unauthorized removal of structures to maintain exclusive board view. Yes, the councilwoman in the center raised her brows. The city attorney leaned forward. I didn't stop. I laid down every document. The grandfathered exemption, the budget discrepancies, the security footage of the private guards on public land, and finally the permit allowing public access to the beach. Then I looked directly at Lynn. You didn't just destroy a dock. You stole a legacy, and you used everyone's money to do it. A moment of silence. Then the council opened the floor. One by one, people stood to speak. A woman who said her daughter learned to swim on that beach before it was fenced off. A former board member who confessed she resigned when Lynn started funneling funds without transparency. A young man who'd been fined 3 times for grilling on the sand, while board members threw wine parties feet away. Each voice chipped away at the false authority Lynn had wrapped herself in. And when the final speaker, a veteran in full uniform, placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "That doc helped save a soldier's soul," the room broke into applause. Lynn tried to respond. She stood slowly, eyes scanning the crowd for some ounce of support. None came. She stammered about safety, about privacy, about community values. But the room had already moved on. The council called for a vote. A motion was placed on the table. Immediate suspension of the HOA Board's shoreline authority, pending a full audit and investigation. The vote passed. Unanimous. Lynn's face went white. Outside City Hall, the crowd gathered around me. Campers, neighbors, reporters, people I'd never met but who knew now that the lake didn't belong to a boardroom. It belonged to the people. And right then, in that moment of victory, I looked toward the horizon and realized we weren't finished. Because power doesn't vanish. It hides. It waits. It finds new forms. So I made a decision. If they could manipulate the rules, then it was time to rewrite them. Not just for me. For every person they'd silenced, fined, bullied, or pushed out. That night, I filed paperwork with the city to begin establishing a permanent nonprofit conservancy for the lakefront. Community-run, state-compliant, free from HOA hands. It would preserve access, protect the land, and hold every future decision to public vote. But first, I had to finish something. I returned home, stepped into my garage, and opened the old shed where the dock materials had been stored for decades. I began rebuilding. By hand. Every nail. Every board. Every echo of my grandfather's vision brought back to life with my own 2 hands. And if you're still with me on this journey, don't just watch. Be part of it. Like this video. Subscribe for what comes next. And comment below, legacy can't be stolen, because this story isn't over. It's only just begun. 2 weeks later, the dock stood tall again. Stronger. Longer. Built to last. And on the opening day of the new community conservancy, people came with canoes, with guitars, with stories of their own. Kids jumped from the end of the dock into the lake. Laughter echoed across the water. And above it all, a new sign stood tall. Not HOA property. Not private beach. But something different. For everyone. Lynn? She resigned quietly a week before the audit report dropped. The audit revealed hundreds of misused funds. Her name on every approval. Civil suits filed. The rest, out of my hands. Justice has its own current. But legacy, that's ours now. And I made sure it's built to stay. For my grandfather. For every neighbor who thought they were powerless. And for everyone watching who needs to know this truth. They can steal wood. But they can't erase roots. The morning the audit results were released, the lake was still. The kind of stillness that only comes after a storm has passed but before the next wave arrives. I sat at the edge of the new dock, legs hanging over the water, watching mist rise from its surface like breath from the earth. And then my phone lit up. It was official. The city had released a public statement. The HOA was under legal review for financial misconduct, abuse of power, and misappropriation of community funds. Lynn's name appeared 12 times in the summary, each attached to a transaction that served no one but the board. But the real twist wasn't in the numbers. It was in the consequences. The council had passed a resolution, a mandatory vote among residents to either dissolve the HOA's authority over shared spaces or restructure it under city oversight with term limits and full transparency. It wasn't just a punishment. It was a reckoning. I stood up from the dock and walked along the beach. New footsteps had replaced the old ones. Families, visitors, locals. No more patrols. No more cameras hiding in bushes. And yet, part of me wondered if it would last. That evening, I got a call. From Lynn. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity beat caution. She didn't sound angry. She sounded tired. She said, "You win." But it wasn't a victory call. It was something else. She asked to meet. Out of sight. Just a conversation. No lawyers. I agreed. We met at the far end of the lake, where the woods touched the water, and no one else wandered. She stood alone, arms crossed, eyes red. And for the first time, she told the truth. It started years ago. The HOA was falling apart. People stopped caring. Then she took control, not out of malice, but fear. She wanted order, prestige. Control gave her a purpose she'd never had before. Then she saw the dock. She didn't know the story behind it, didn't care to ask. All she saw was an eyesore that didn't fit her vision of perfection. So she removed it, and everything spiraled from there. I listened, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because even tyrants have reasons. And sometimes the reason is just being lost. She apologized, not with flowers or letters, but with silence. The kind of silence that hangs heavy after too many wrongs and too few rights. Then she walked away. I never saw her again. The HOA was restructured. New board, new bylaws. Everything voted on, recorded, published. The dock was listed as a protected community landmark. The Conservancy took official stewardship of the lakefront. I was offered a seat on the board, but I declined. This wasn't about holding power. It was about making sure no one abused it again. 1 year later, on the anniversary of my grandfather's passing, the community held a sunrise ceremony on the dock. People lit lanterns, told stories. Someone read aloud from his journals. And then something unexpected happened. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, stepped forward holding a folded flag. He said his uncle was a soldier, that he used to sit on the dock and talk about the stars with him. He laid the flag at the end of the dock and whispered, "Thank you." No one spoke after that. They didn't have to, because the lake had become more than a battleground. It had become a memory, a reminder, a symbol. And to you, still here, still watching, still holding on to every twist of this story, this isn't just about fighting an HOA. It's about reclaiming what they try to take from all of us. Our stories, our peace, our place in this world. If this story moved you, let it ripple out. Like this video. Comment "They can't erase legacy." Subscribe so these stories don't get buried. Because every time we speak up, someone else finds the courage to stand. They tore down a dock. We build a movement. And in the end, the water remembered. Always does. 3 months later, the Conservancy held its first public festival. Families gathered where fences once stood. Local artists painted murals across the old HOA utility shed, turning it into a memory wall. Veterans from nearby towns came with flags, patches, and folded photographs. There was music, food, laughter, everything that had once been forbidden under the old rules. I stood near the dock, hands in my pockets, trying to stay invisible. But people kept approaching. Some just nodded. Some shared quiet stories. One woman held my wrist and said, "You didn't just fight them. You reminded us who we are." But that wasn't what broke me. It was the boy from before, the one with the folded flag. He returned with his father this time, a man with deep eyes and a worn cap. He asked to sit with me on the dock. We talked for an hour. He told me about his brother, the soldier. Said he used to send letters from overseas asking about the lake. Said this place was the only thing that ever gave him peace. He didn't make it back. They scattered his ashes here last spring, quietly, without ceremony. I didn't speak. I just listened. And when he was done, I handed him something. A laminated copy of the Conservancy Charter. His brother's name was listed among the honorary stewards, right next to my grandfather's. He didn't cry, but he held it like something sacred. That night, as the lanterns floated across the lake, I thought about what had changed. Not just the dock, not just the rules, but the feeling in there. The unspoken truth that this place, once locked behind signs and threats, now belonged to everyone again. But stories don't end with silence. They end with legacy. And that legacy was just beginning. A young couple approached me near the fire pit. They'd moved into the neighborhood after the hearing. They'd heard the story, followed every post, watched every video. The man smiled and said, "We bought the house next to yours. Thought it'd be nice to raise our daughter somewhere with backbone." Their little girl, maybe 4 years old, was clutching a wooden toy boat. She ran toward the lake and sent it floating from the dock's edge. I watched it drift. It reminded me of something my grandfather once told me, something I hadn't thought about in years. He said the water remembers the people who respect it and forgets the ones who try to own it. That line echoed in my mind as I turned away from the crowd. And then I saw the last surprise of the night. At the far end of the conservancy grounds, a new bench had been installed beneath a tree. A plaque was screwed into the wood. It read, "For those who guarded peace more than property." Below that, two names, my grandfather's and mine. I didn't know who had done it. No one said a word. But I sat down on that bench and looked out at the water, listening to the soft sound of waves against the shore. And for the first time in years, I felt something settle inside me. Not victory, not revenge, just peace. And if you're still watching, still walking this journey with me, don't let this be the end. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Comment peace is the real power because someone out there is still fighting for their own shoreline, their own memory, their own story. We built something real here. Not just for today, for the ones who come after us. The lake will remember. And so will we. A year later, the lake had changed, but not in the way people expected. It hadn't been commercialized, branded, or swallowed by tourism. It had become something far rarer, sacred. Schools took field trips to study its ecosystem. Local poets held readings on a dock at sunrise. Families camped beside the shoreline without fear of fines or warnings. And every month, the community gathered under the stars for what they called Legacy Night. It started as a simple idea: honor the people who built this place with stories, not just stones. But it grew into something powerful. That night, as twilight faded and the dock lights flickered on, I was asked to speak. I stood in front of a crowd that had once been silent, scared, divided. And now they were united. They weren't just witnesses to change. They were the change. I told them about my grandfather's final journal entry, something I had never shared publicly before. A line he'd written just weeks before he passed. When they try to take from you, don't fight with fists. Build something they can't destroy. I let those words settle. You could hear the waves breathing behind me. Then I pulled out something I'd kept hidden for too long. A folded letter. Unopened. It was addressed to me in my grandfather's handwriting. I'd found it in the attic when rebuilding the dock, but I hadn't had the strength to read it. Until now. I opened it slowly, voice cracking as I read. He wrote about the fear he carried after the war, the guilt, the silence. But mostly, he wrote about the dock. How every board reminded him that life could still be built. How every ripple reminded him that even pain could become purpose. And at the end, he wrote, if you ever lose your way, come back to the water. It knows how to carry broken things. By the time I finished, there wasn't a dry eye on the sand. Someone lit a lantern and set it floating. Then another. Then dozens. Each one carried a name, a memory, a moment. The lake shimmered with light. And in the middle of it all, I saw a boy launch a toy boat, just like the one from before. But this time, it carried a note taped to the mast. It read, for the ones who fought without hate. That's when it hit me. This story, it wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to every hand that rebuilt, every voice that rose, every person who refused to be silenced. Lynn, she moved states away, started over. No more boards, no more control. I heard she volunteers now, teaching kids how to garden. Some said she changed, others didn't care. Forgiveness isn't always about them. Sometimes it's the last step in setting yourself free. And this dock, it's still here, stronger than before. Weathered, yes, but standing tall. And it will keep standing. For the veterans who found peace here. For the children learning to swim. For the families who gather without fear. If you followed this journey through every twist, every heartbreak, every act of quiet rebellion, thank you. This isn't just a story about a dock. It's a story about power reclaimed, voices restored, and peace earned through persistence. And if it meant something to you, don't let it end here. Like the video. Subscribe to this channel. Comment some things can't be stolen. Because the real victory isn't just what we saved. It's what we built together. And no matter where you are, no matter what they've taken from you, remember this. They can try to erase what you've made, but they can never erase why you made it. The lake remembers. So will we.